Welcome to the Perfect Life Awakening Show, hosted by Royce Morales. Royce has been a transformational facilitator, teaching groundbreaking, spiritually based courses for more than 4 decades. She is the author of 3 books about her teachings. Join Royce as she takes you on a journey into how to live your best life and find your true purpose through discovering the origins of subconscious, disempowering notions and releasing them. She talks with experts and inspiring people just like you who learned to trust their intuitive inner wisdom, which led to life-changing shifts. Today, her guests live an empowered existence and are helping change the world to a higher consciousness place based on truth and love. You deserve to awaken to, align with, and embody your true self and live a life filled with love. Transform yourself from triggered to empowered and create your perfect life. Here is your host, Royce Morales.
Hello, welcome to my show. I'm so glad you're here. I am so excited to spend some time with my guest today, and she's in Australia, and what a challenge it was to find a time that would work for her and for me. So hopefully it's not in the middle of the night or whatever. So thank you for being here. And let me introduce Toni, Dr. Toni Reilly. I'm just going to tell you everything that she has told me about herself, and then she's going to fill in and tell us how she got started and what it's all about. But Dr. Toni Reilly is Australia's foremost past life, reincarnation, and afterlife specialist. She's also the author of a best-selling book called Awake, The Purpose of Life and Why You Are Here, which is, I think, the number one question that all of us ask all the time. At least I know I sure do. She's guided thousands to remember their past lives, visit loved ones in the afterlife, and travel in between lives, not just for interest's sake, which is what I always tell my students. It's not just about being curious, although that could start it, but it's really about therapy and personal development. That's my attitude also. In fact, everything I'm saying about you, I could say about myself. It's really interesting how much in common we have. She was trained under the renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Brian Weiss, who I'm sure most of you have heard of. He's an amazing man. And then she honed her intuition and mediumship at the Arthur Findlay College in London. She then founded the Toni Reilly Institute in 2009, and she developed something really interesting that I hope she talks about called SoulLife Coaching, spiritual psychology. And she did this after 2 decades of extensive observation, research, and her own personal experiences. This modality incorporates past life regression and modern spiritual psychology, which I think is finally happening in the world, yay, and personal development. And what I love about what she does, and I'm sure we'll talk about this too, her goal was to, quote, normalize metaphysics and get it into mainstream thinking, which, I've been doing this for 40 years, and it's finally starting to get into the mainstream thought. I remember I used to mention past lives in my courses, and people would kind of give me that shocked deer in the headlight look or roll their eyes or, how do you know that's true? There'd be arguments. It was just really ridiculous. And now I talk about them all the time, and people just go, oh, wow, that's interesting. Okay. So her purpose in what she does is to help people find the deeper meaning behind life's challenges. And she encourages living life from a purposeful, connected place. Her work embraces our predestined life mission, and it has amazing, miraculous healing properties, which, yes, it does. I've witnessed that myself. And it's about incorporating all of this into daily life. I don't know, because I've been doing this so long, I can't even imagine not having the information at my fingertips in terms of, why this is going on and what's the trigger and what's really going on and what's it all about. So I really appreciate that, Toni. Yeah. So enough about you. Let's just jump right in and tell us how you actually started in this field. What is your background? What inspired you to do all this?
Hmm. Thanks for having me, Royce. I'm know I'm going to enjoy this conversation. Um, Getting into this, the short story is I had an extraordinarily mainstream life before this all opened up. So I was married with 3 little kids, busy, busy, busy. I used to program software and do admin type work. And in my middle 30s, I ended up, my marriage broke up. So it was a catalyst for me to start soul searching. It started before, actually, but it escalated when I had that freedom to really start to delve deeper into, well, I suppose, why am I here?
Yeah.
And so that's what started me. And in that process, first of all, I started with trying to find out if I'm intuitive, because I was told I was intuitive, psychic. Why don't I know this? I mean, I'm 30, 35 years old. So I was told, meditate. You have to meditate. So there's a bit of a story behind it all, but I immediately try to find, how do I meditate? And in this process, I found a meditation teacher, and she was very, I call it mainstream with all due respect, but the fluffy side of the new age movement was really didn't resonate with me at all. But so of course, it's serendipity, which I didn't really understand back then. But this woman shows up out of the blue, really. I found her on Google or on the internet, when the internet was very new. Anyway, she came up, and people in our world, or this world that we work in now, didn't have websites, but she did. So anyway, I started to meditate with her, and of course my intuitive senses were very there, and it's just that I hadn't realized what they were, or how they worked. So in the process of learning to meditate and develop those intuitive senses, she told me, my teacher, her name was Mary Milady, she told me to read Many Lives, Many Masters, the Dr. Brian Weiss book. Never heard of it, never knew anything about it. I was crazy. I was a little psycho then, just couldn't get enough of this. So I scrambled to find that book. Took me a few weeks, but when I found it, I read it in almost one sitting. And I remember thinking, oh, this is what I'm here to do.
Wow.
And I didn't really, I really couldn't stop it from them. This compulsion just took over me. So that's how it started.
Huh. Wow. Our stories are so similar. It's just amazing. Wow. Including breaking up with the first husband to do all this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, okay. So go from, wow, this is what you have to do, to now doing it. How did that happen?
Well, so the next thing, of course, I've read Dr. Brian Weiss's book, and I'm thinking, oh, I have to have one of these past life sessions. So I go back to Mary, my meditation teacher. I said, I've got to have one of these sessions. I'm thinking to myself, nobody knows about this. I'm going to have to go to the States and have this done with him. Of course, he didn't do them anymore. Even then, he already stopped. But she says to me, I can do that. So day or two later, I'm laying on her couch in the living room. She's regressing me, and oh my goodness, it was phenomenal. If I'm perfectly honest, before I started meditating, I did not know about psychology. I didn't know about therapy. I didn't think I had any issues. Of course, the moment I started meditating, it was like, holy shit, there's some issues there. And they just kept coming at me. So by the time I was having this, a few months later, I'm having this past life session, I already knew that, oh, I do have some issues. So I asked to address those. And they were, I could not speak in front of people. I would heat up and feel like I just wanted to die. So couldn't speak in front of people. So I asked about that. The other thing was I couldn't write. I couldn't have people read what I was writing. So I went through school covering my writing, and I couldn't bear to have even my kids looking at what I'm writing. The poor little things couldn't even read yet, but it's like, stop reading what I'm writing if I was typing or writing. And so I thought that's a weird thing as well. I'll ask about that. And the other thing I asked about was, I am intuitive. How on earth have I gotten to this age with no idea about it? And those were the three things. And so I lay on that couch, and I literally could see myself and scenes in the past life. And it was super emotional for me. And obviously, because I saw it, no one told me. I saw it myself. I know I didn't make it up. I know it's not imagination. These images are dropping in. And I was very logical. I probably a certain amount of logical anyway, but back then I was very logical. So I knew I hadn't made it up. And there it was. I saw a couple of past lives in that session, and I came away from that thinking, oh my goodness, this can help so many people in its simplicity, really. And that's how it started. I just couldn't stop making that happen from that moment forward.
Yeah. And so then you started doing that with other people, or how did that go?
Wow. Yeah. So after the session, I say to Mary, I have to learn this. I have to find out how to learn this. She says, I'm having a course next weekend teaching a couple of girls how to do this. I'm like, well, of course you are. So I got to sit in on that class. What she did then, it was very simple. She regressed myself and two other girls. There were just three of us in her living room, and it would be one of us on the couch, Mary regressing us. So we're watching what she's doing, and we're listening, and we're hearing, of course, what's being relayed back by whose ever turn it was to be regressed. So our training was to be regressed over and over a period of a couple of days and observe. So it was that simple. After 2 days, I used to go between two states then because of my breakup. But so I was back in the state where my kids were. And at that stage, I had started working in a new age store, and I was reading tarot cards. So I had this platform, I suppose, through that shop of people who already, if anyone was going to be at all aware of past lives, there was at least some of these people that would come into that store that were. So I ended up with this, a lot of people who were interested in being regressed. So the doors just flung open for me, and I started to regress people. I did not have an ounce of confidence issues around it. I just felt this was my thing, and I started regressing people. And needless to say, these sessions went like clockwork. The first ones did, and the people would just have amazing results. And part of the actual my own guidance was that I was to take notes of every session and record them, and I did. So I have all my notes. So so that's how it started. Wow. So there was training with Mary. Of course, I was very aware that I needed to somehow be associated with this man. Dr. Brian Weiss was the first person that I knew of that knew about past lives. So of course there are others, I just wasn't aware of them. So I thought I must go and train with that man. So after I'd already been working with people for quite some time, I say quite some time, 6 to 12 months, I went to train with him in New York. So yeah.
And so it was a different technique that he offered? Or?
He was he is my favorite to this day because of his approach. Of course, he's clinically trained, being a psychiatrist, but he was also very spiritual and in himself. And I guess that had happened through what's happened in he and his wife's lives. So yes, he had a different technique, but it wasn't that different. It was just more that he used quite traditional hypnosis techniques to get people into the relaxed state. And he called his people clients. He called his people patients, whereas we called them clients.
Right.
That was really the main difference. And also interesting, his lovely wife also helps him in the course, and she presents her way. She was from a social work background, so she presented or did her sessions in a bit more of a, I guess we call it a spiritual way, but rather than clinical. So it was just wonderful though to go there. And he also, one of the things that he said, there's a lot of people in his training, I think 120, they were from all over the world, but he said he had, when he first started running those courses, he had made them for other therapists.
Oh, yeah.
So other psychiatrists, other psychologists, and he said it was really hard because they were so logical and they couldn't get out of their logical self to just allow it and, you know, let it kind of run free. And he said never again would they do that. So they, after whenever they had done that, they opened it up to anybody who was drawn to it. So yeah, so I guess even being in that room with all of those people who were, some of them were hypnotherapists, some of them were psychologists, and some of them probably were people like me who were really just opening up to this kind of thing. So yeah, it was just brilliant.
Wow. And so are you still using the hypnosis techniques, or do you have your own techniques?
Even when I went to that training, I realized, oh, the way that I'm doing this, it works. So I guess what I did later was I incorporated a little bit of each. The things that I felt really resonated for me was what I use. So a little bit of both, but I like, as things progressed, I feel like if that person, our client, if they are communicating direct with their soul, we are superfluous to what's going on there. We really are on the sideline, facilitating. We're not telling them anything. We really only need to get them in that relaxed state so that their information is pure. It's coming from them. Their soul made their plan. And I feel like that is where that maybe traditional hypnotherapy training is a little bit interfering in some ways. I know it works. I'm not putting anyone's hypnotherapy ways down, but for me, I discovered that I didn't need to put suggestions in. We didn't work that way. We always went with, we were prompting that client to tell us what was going on, what was happening, how did they feel. And the other thing was, it's a past life. So the thing is, it's happened. You can't change it. So it's not like we want to tell you, oh, we're going to change the outcome of this, because it's happened already. So what I found, and probably many others did too, is that the healing happens when you understand why it happened. Why did you die that way? Why was the life those circumstances, whether they were wonderful or tragic? When that person knew and understood, that was all it took to fix them. If they'd had a phobia that came through, or they'd wanted to bring that confidence in now, or the skills that they'd had then. So I just thought it was incredible. So I always, from then, took that way forward with the way that I developed the therapy. Yeah.
So you talk about spiritual psychology. How does that fit with what you're doing?
So from that workshop, I did get regressed by Dr. Brian Weiss too, which was absolutely magical. on stage.
Wow.
But when I came back from that training, I realized there was a huge gap in, at that point, just people who knew how to do regression, people who could guide people through their past lives. So from that moment, I came back, I thought, it's guided, I'm sure, but I need to start to develop a program to teach people, because this is going to be in demand. So that was the start of the spiritual psychology. So it started with me developing a training around teaching people past life regression, how to facilitate it. And that was the start. So that's our main therapy. But of course, through this process of my own awakening and my own self-awareness happening through all of this as well, I realized that, without self-awareness, you are not really awake very much to what's going on in life. And you're a bit intolerant of other people, not understanding that people, I guess, hurt people, your own reactions to things, why you behave a certain way, why certain people poke your buttons. So all of these things were all playing out for me. And I thought, oh my goodness, if everybody were somewhat self-aware and understood themselves, then it changes your life. I felt really strongly that one person at a time, we can change the world, but we have to change ourselves. That's where it all begins. So, so that's the basis of what turned into spiritual psychology. But what happened is there were a few elements that I realized we needed, that one would need to be able to grow really beautifully, or wake up, I guess is one way to put it, another way to put it. And so I developed almost a personality program where, or what it was, is it's a version of numerology. So it's based on numerology, but we can tell what someone has come here to do because our lives are predestined. I came to all this information through my own transcendent experiences and what streamed through. And of course, thousands of other people, going in between lives and to past lives. So I knew that we can help people understand what their mission in life is. And also to start the self-awareness off, get to know your personality, get to know your inherent characteristics, get to know what you can change about yourself and what you can't, because some of the things about us we have to accept. And they're awesome if you accept them and look at the positive side of them. And I felt that it uplifted people to know these things about themselves that were really good and boosted them. And of course, then the flip side of our life mission is we have a challenge. Life's messy. And every single one of us comes, and we will be embedded with an insecurity or more than one. And our behavior will escalate it or we'll try to mask it. But all of these things that will happen to every single one of us because we come to Earth to do this is something that when we know it, it makes it so much easier to navigate. So this system that I call Life Map is able to, help a spiritual psychologist or someone that does the training to understand other people, themselves as well. But also it's a great tool for anyone to understand themselves. That was one part of this spiritual psychology. And the second thing was to really outline our insecurities, how they develop, how we understand them, how we really get a handle on who we are. They truly mold who we are as a person. And I called them bruises, but in other psychological terms, they would be called attachment styles, wounds, these kinds of things. Depends what you're familiar with. But it all kind of comes back to the same thing. It will be things like abandonment, rejection, injustice, betrayal, humiliation. Those things are key. One or more of them affects every single one of us. And if we know this, life is just different, better, because we understand why we react. We understand also why our people around us react or behave in a certain way. So the bruises was another big part of the spiritual psychology. The other section was counseling. So we teach, it's kind of traditional counseling. We call it intuitive counseling, but the basis of it is listening, properly listening to someone. So whether you're listening to your little kid or your mum or your colleagues, if we're properly listening and taking notice of what are they actually saying to us, because we're watching a bit of their body language, and stop trying to come up with a solution while we're supposed to be listening to what they're saying, it's really key and it's important. So we have the counseling module in there as well. But it's written in a way that we've taken out any filler. So we don't really focus very much on the history of any of these things. We focus on practicing it and understanding why it works. And then we just get into using it so that it's obvious why it works. And then the fourth thing is where I started. The fourth main thing is the past life regression, in between lives, and of course we can facilitate people to go into the afterlife as well, to connect with their past over people. So we ended up calling that recall therapy. Those four elements create this spiritual psychology. But I think, Royce, I'm talking so much, but I think if I was to nut down the difference between traditional psychology and spiritual psychology, the big thing is we absolutely take account of the fact that we are a soul. We're the spirit of the person that we are now. I'm Toni, you're Royce, and that our life is destined, and we can also connect with that part of ourselves to make our lives easier. So I think that's probably the main difference. It's much less logical.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we need to take a little bit of a break. And when we get back, I want to talk a little bit more about destiny, because that's kind of a trigger for a lot of people when you say that your life is destined. And I want to get into that a little bit more. So I'm talking to Dr. Toni Reilly, and we will be right back.
Om Times TV. Do you crave joy but feel stuck? Do you go through life feeling constantly triggered and frustrated? Fear is likely the culprit, and subconscious fear is likely sabotaging you. Perfect Life Awakening is a time-tested, spiritually based approach to inner transformation created by Royce Morales. For over 40 years, she has helped people get to the origins of subconscious fears and ultimately help them find their true purpose and a life full of joy. Sign up for Perfect Life Awakening today at roycemorales.com. You deserve to go from triggered to empowered, shifting your life with Perfect Life Awakening. Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
want to eat apples and bananas. I need to eat apples and bananas. Why can't I eat apples and bananas?
Support the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks to help provide meals to those in need. Join us at feedingamerica.org.
Welcome back. I'm Royce Morales, the founder of Perfect Life Awakening, and I'm talking to Dr. Toni Reilly, and we were talking about spiritual psychology and past lives, and you talked a little bit about destiny, and I want to have you talk a little bit more about that, because whenever I bring up destiny in my classes, people just kind of go nuts. It's like, what do you mean we can't change what we're here to do? And I know my own personal life story. I was convinced that I was supposed to be an artist. I was born with natural talent. It's what I could do. I was the best artist in high school and college and all of that stuff. And if you had said to me that, guess what, Royce, you're going to be a spiritual teacher, I would have laughed. I was on the floor, because that would be the farthest thing from my mind. And yet the universe conspired and put all this stuff in front of me, and here I am 40 years later. So tell me a little bit about what you feel about destiny. What is that about for you?
For me, destiny is not a destination. It's not an outcome. It's every single moment of every single day. And I think that people, they don't realize that. I think they think that it is an outcome. It's something that they're striving for, that they have to reach. And it's a pressure, I think, that they potentially feel. And it's like, ease up. It's every moment of every day.
Okay. So when you do, what is it that you call the life map, and it says you're supposed to fill in the blank or whatever, how does that fit with destiny? How does that work for you? And how did you figure that out anyway? How did you come up with that little equation, so to speak?
It's the first thing is destiny is not what people think. And I actually do wonder if a lot of people get disappointed by that fact. But the reality is, what we discovered, life is it does have a set, I guess, challenge for each of us that we come in to do. And I suppose overcoming that or working through that is part of the destiny. But it'll be something very simple, like discovering how to communicate better, how to communicate your needs, because these bruises that start out when we're little kids, they shape us. And then as we start to soul search later in life, we have to unravel all that. And that's what the destiny is. It's not, even if we are to be a brilliant, famous artist or a brilliant, famous actor or influential anybody, that's not even the destiny. It will still be the personal experience that individual goes through that's actually the real purpose of life. So isn't that interesting? Yeah.
Do you find that when people get in touch with their past lives, I know that this happens a lot to the people that I work with, they discovered that everything was kind of set up in a way for them to do what they were supposed to do that maybe they didn't do 20 lifetimes ago, or maybe they did this horrible thing in one life and this life is all about cleaning it up. Do you find that happens with your regression work?
I definitely find that when people recall past lives, it is always somehow related to this life. Yeah. So what we know is most of us have probably incarnated hundreds of times, maybe even many more. But when people are recalling them, they will recall lives that somehow share information that they need to know for this life or heal something for this life. So in that regard, if they're working through let's say rejection. Let's say they're fearing, or abandonment's probably an easier one. They're fearing being left behind or not liking to be alone. What happens then is the past life or lives that they recall will somehow help them understand why the fear is so strong. Even though actually it's destined for them to do that this lifetime, it helps them comprehend it a little more. And also it helps them to potentially see who the other players are with them in this lifetime. So they can recognize other people that are in this with them.
Do you find, and I know that this happens in the work that I do, people will get in touch with a past life. Let's continue your example with abandonment. And they discover that 20 lifetimes ago, they abandoned a baby. Let's just use that as an example. And they're here to clean that up and now experience being abandoned. But once they clean up what they did in that past life and maybe do something about it in this life, they don't have to set that up. They don't have to experience being abandoned. Does that ever happen with your work?
I think it's more, yes, because being abandoned is a perception. It's truly a perception, because people who come here to do the wound of or the bruise of abandonment, they were not necessarily abandoned, but they feel like they were. So when they go back and see these past lives or this past life, whichever they see, and it helps them understand, let's say potentially with someone with abandonment, they really feel it with their, let's say their current partner or their ex-husband. We'll say the ex-husband, let's say that it was really deep for them, and the husband leaves and they're devastated and feel so abandoned, and it's affecting them so much. So then what they might find is, in the past life, back to the example you gave, they may see that husband was their kid in that past life, and indeed something tore them apart, whether it was consciously abandoned the child or they were a caveman and got, injured in the forest and never came back. But one way or another, they're like, oh. And what happens then is this animosity that they've had towards the husband. It could be any dynamic, but towards the husband, it dissipates, because they have this understanding of that this person came in to, I guess, help them have this experience this time. So it's really interesting and liberating.
Yeah. And I don't mean to discount your work at all, but I find that taking it even deeper, there's always something that we did first that would have us set that up. And
Absolutely.
and the work that I do, it's difficult because of that, because I'm asking people to take responsibility even for their husband abandoning them. It's a big leap to do that for people. So does that ever happen?
It's, Royce, something that I discovered long ago now, but early on in this was, we're not victims.
Right.
We're volunteers.
Yes.
And in that regard, and it's something that, as the work that we do, you can't say that to people until they arrive at that understanding themselves. And that's, I think, what this type of therapy will help them arrive at. But really, the caveat is, we are not victims. We have agreed to come and have this experience every single time, every single aspect of it. And I think, oh gosh, I don't know if I'm going too far to the left of field here, but something that I notice on social media a real lot of late is where we see a lot of this narcissistic. It's so rife, and it's like, gosh, you have to.
That's my dog.
Yeah.
Sorry. She's barking
Okay.
at something. I don't know what. Gigi, come on. I'm sorry.
And
Go
I
ahead.
think that mindset of what's happening is the perfect example of not taking responsibility, because I think I think what happens there is people don't understand that there was a need in them that had them with that person in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
That person's feeding a need in them, was something that they desired or wanted. And when we realize that, when we admit it, it's taking responsibility, as you said. That's what taking responsibility is. And boy, is it hard to get there.
Yeah.
But we do eventually. And then we'd realize, and the past life thing might help to show up some other experiences that the person's had in a past life that helps them understand it more. And that's where the liberation comes in. They don't really feel like they're a victim of that person anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, yeah.
And remembering that they chose it, on a spiritual level.
It was agreed.
Between lives place where they're sitting there going, I think I need to experience being abandoned. Let's choose this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's talk about the between lives, because that is something that I think is finally coming out in the open. Again, like I was saying earlier, that, metaphysics is becoming more mainstream. And I think between lives, that mysterious realm, what is your intention behind taking people there? What happens there?
The between lives, my caveat for the between lives is where the reincarnation is planned. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that space is also for the human experience, because when we get to travel there as a transcendent experience, it's divine. It does not feel like anything that we experience here on earth. It's very special. And something that I realized is there's a massive influx of near-death experiences on podcasts and shows, and people having them. So what I realized is a near-death experience is a spontaneous trip to between lives, as in they don't know it's going to happen and they haven't sought out a facilitated session. But a between lives session is very much like a near-death experience. So that individual, just like it does with near-death experience, that individual person's going to get exactly what they need for their current life in that space. But that space is so nice. It is so beautiful. It's so powerful to get a visit there, and it changes people. I think that you cannot come back from there and not absolutely know that we are so much more than this life and this body and even who we are this moment. So between lives. And also, Royce, with my work, it always, for quite a few years, it was past lives. Occasionally people would go between lives. So I learned all of this through trial and error, really. But what happened is there came a time where everyone that came for past life regression would go between lives. So I got to document that for a long time as well. And it was always beautiful and just super healing there. And I think there's beyond there as well, where I think that's where our true soul energy returns to. But yes, between life space is wonderful. And I think that people really love the thought of that there's a soul family. And it's very exciting to go and discover who you maybe are here again with. So it's just a wonderful thing to do. Yeah.
Do your clients get in touch with, I want to call them angels, but, for lack of a better word, but higher consciousness beings on these between life?
Yeah, they do. And I think that personally, and most likely because I don't talk in terms of angels, believe me, I believe in them, but I notice that people see energies in the way that they need to interpret them. So for some people, they will appear as angelic beings, maybe even those masters. But for some people, and most people, I find this actually when they go between lives, is they'll see colored energy, and more so than even a physical form. But some people might need to see it more in a physical form, and so they will. But those forms, the color or the light, will be wise. They will be wise, and they will feel how connected they are to them, and that they know them already. They're familiar. And if they know them on earth, this life, they'll also know who they were or who they are. So it's really special. And I guess it is the angelic realms.
Yeah. And what about, I know that you mentioned that you help people reconnect with those who have passed. How does that work for you? What do you do with that?
With the reconnection to the afterlife, or visiting a loved one in the afterlife, that also came about when I was working with people for past lives, and suddenly their passed over person would come in, even though they'd not even mentioned to me that had happened in their life. So it was another area that we developed because it started to happen. But what happened was I realized that we could facilitate for someone's loved one to come in and visit them. So I'm very pro mediumship as well, which is where you have a medium who relays the spirit to the person who's still here. But with this reconnection to the afterlife, that person gets to directly visit with their passed over person. And it's so beautiful. It's it almost brings tears to my eyes, how lovely it is for them to have that. Yeah, to help them overcome their grief, or just know that their person's okay over there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you say that, do you do the mediumship with them, or how do they actually get in touch?
So it's much the same process as taking them between lives or into a past life even. But what we do is or the facilitator, in this case me, I just direct for their person to come visit them. So I'm really not involved in it, facilitating it, but they get to talk with their person themselves. I notice in those realms, and also the past life realms, sometimes even definitely in between lives, it can be really intrusive. You kind of need to know when to just back off and let that person have the experience, because it's so personal. And to have my voice booming in, it can be really disruptive. But I think part of the thing with becoming one of these types of therapists, or SoulLife Coach, I call us, is the people who come to do this always intuitive. So it's something that you come to know when to just be quiet and allow that person to have time, because as you know, it's timeless in those realms. And for them, for the facilitator, it might be 10 minutes has passed, but for them, it can feel like a few seconds. So, yeah.
Wow. So how do you, since a lot of my students arrive with a lot of, like you were saying before, some of that real strong logic, and being one that used to be that logic, how do you deal with people that just, they can't get it because they can't get past their logical mind? What is it that you do with them?
Well, I feel like there's ways that if you get someone very logical, there's ways that we can guide them in. I'm going to say trick them. And I mean that it's not sneaky, but it's just things like you get them focused elsewhere instead of them controlling the relaxation process. So it's things like, it's really just in the way that you relax them. You might have them counting steps. So they're too busy counting steps, getting in the relaxed state to be thinking about, oh, this is not working and what's happening, that kind of thing. So there's ways that we can sidestep that logic or that control. It's actually the only thing that stops anyone recalling a past life or going in between, because we all have the capacity to do it, except part of the human experience is we're controllers and we have our mind. So we can get around it.
Yeah. It's bringing to mind, I used to work with a student who was a lawyer, and need I say more, but he was Mr. Logic to the nth degree. And yet he started to have all of these really interesting experiences in his meditation. And he would always say, oh, I think I made it up. And I finally said to him, you know what? Give yourself permission to make it up and see what happens. And it kind of, everything blew up for him in a positive way. He was able to really get in touch with stuff. So it's kind of like giving people permission to, you know, come up with something and just trust it. And then what was interesting is after he would have these sessions with me, everything in his life would start shifting, you know. And I said, well, see, you know, I don't think you're making it up, because look at the results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't make that up, can you? And also, I think probably one of the big things that is an assurance that they haven't made it up is they get emotional.
Yes.
And you know, sometimes it's because what's going on is emotive or it's caused emotion, but sometimes it's a physical reaction where some people just tears start streaming down. To me, that's an affirmation of truth.
Yeah.
So,
yes. Yes, I pointed that out to him as well. Like, things up, but you're crying. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, God, there's so many more things I want to talk to you about. Let me see if there's anything I missed on my list here. Oh yeah, this one stood out. This was a question that you said you gave to me. You say that Generation Z are the game changers of humanity. So what does that mean? Tell me. We need the game changers.
So in the process of researching the personalities and the missions that we each fall into that we're doing here, Gen Z turns up, and they are these kids. They're not even kids anymore. They're already adults.
Yeah.
They were born from 2000 on. And what we know with numerology is the number 2 energy is kind and soft, and it's inherently intuitive. So what, in a nutshell, we before the 2000s had 1 energy and 9 energy because we were born in 19 something. These kids were born in 2000. So some of them, many of them, don't have 1 or 9 energy. 9 is thinking, so it's logic. 1 is doing. Some of them don't have it. So they have this inherent kindness, intuition. And what that means is across the planet, it doesn't matter what their culture is, across the planet, we have softer people. People who default to their intuition before logic. And that's the main difference. And it's why that things will change.
Yay.
Yeah.
We definitely do.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your book and how did that get started and what is it about?
My book's called Awake, The Purpose of Life and Why You're Here. I'm about to start a podcast based around it, actually, talking to clients I wrote that book so that people can understand destiny and the purpose of life and how it plays out every day and every minute, and with the parents we chose and the experiences we have, the relationships we have. So that's what the book's about. In my life, I was very candid with some of the things that I did or experienced, and I presented in a way that it is destiny, and we don't need to feel guilty about or a victim either of anything that has gone on in our lives if we can just understand the deeper meaning behind it. So, yeah.
And the deeper meaning is?
The deeper meaning is usually to have an emotional experience, to feel deep emotional experiences. And of course, touch, taste, sound, the things that this human body facilitates for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I would add to somehow get us to love, to awaken love inside of us.
Absolutely. Yes. Self-love and love, acceptance. What life is all about. Yeah.
So we only have like a minute left. Tell us how to get in touch with you and what you're available to do. And I know Australia is a weird time zone, but
we of course we're global. So because we have the internet now, so people can have sessions with me. I'm doing those at the moment, and in the middle of the year, I'll have another intake for SoulLife coaches, if anyone's keen for that. You can listen into my podcast. It's going to be on YouTube at Dr. Toni Reilly. And you can find me on all of social media. And the website is ToniReillyInstitute.com.
And how do you spell Reilly? And
R-E-I.
Toni with an I.
Toni with an I, T-O-N-I, Reilly, R-E-I-L-L-Y, Institute.com.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you. Keep up the good work. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Royce. Thank you for all that you do also.
Thank you. And if anybody's interested in taking one of my classes, I will be starting one really soon, actually at the end of February. So reach out to me at roycemorales.com. And I hope to see you in one of my classes. Thank you again, Toni.